very pleased to be able to welcome here Ian Florance, who was one of the founders of the European Test Publishers Group. And we've asked Ian here today to talk about his experience and knowledge of psychometric testing. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
Ian, you've worked with psychometric testing all your life. Do a lot of companies use these?
It's the major means by which companies understand human beings at work. According to a lot of recent surveys, about 70% of blue chips use tests. The other thing is that the internet has widely extended accessibility to testing. A lot of smaller companies are now beginning to use them. And geographically, whereas 50 years ago they were mainly used in mainland Europe and the Anglo-Saxon world, now they're being used very widely in China, the Far East and the Middle East. So yes, they're used very widely and they work very well, but there is a problem.
And what's that?
Well, the first thing to say is that psychometrics, as it exists at the moment, was invented and started in the late 19th century, and it received its really big growth period during the First and Second World Wars. And if you think about how the world has changed since then you can see that probably psychometric testing would have needed to change in quite a big way. In fact, it hasn't. Although a lot of the things about it do work, it really hasn't changed in line with how the world has changed and how our thinking has changed. Let me give you two examples. If you think about the late 19th century, the UK was a manufacturing business. It dominated world markets. It didn't have to compete. A lot of the people who worked in companies were fairly low-waged and unskilled. There wasn't recruitment. Testing really hasn't kept up with what's going on in the world today, which is service economies and people using knowledge and intelligence to create value. The second thing is our understanding of what's going on in human beings has accelerated since the late 19th century when Freud was still alive. And in particular in the last 20 years, you could say that that's been the golden age of understanding why human beings do what they do. Psychometrics is rooted in analysis, not in science. So there is a problem there.
Ian, how do you think the new thinking and research of Peter Robertson and Human Insight adds value to this field for companies?
I suppose what I think is so exciting about it is the way that it doesn't assume that the individual human being, the drives inside an individual human being, the illnesses of a human being are the basic data you have to use. If you think about it, psychometric tests were used initially to look at an individual person, find out what was wrong with them, what their personality was like, what their ability was like. That's quite useful information. So you could sort of use a test with your marketing manager and say, well, he or she is an introvert, which is quite useful. But it's very difficult to extrapolate from that to the whole organisation. Wouldn't it be much more useful to say, actually, the whole organisation has certain qualities and we've got to see how the person and the organisation interacts. Now, whether Peter Robertson came up through a different training background, has different interests, or whether he's latched on to what's happened in the last 20 years in terms of new sciences, he comes at this whole problem from in a different way. What he looks at is how systems work, how organisations work, and then looks at individual human beings afterwards. It becomes much easier if you use human insight tools to actually be a leader of an organisation rather than somebody that's just worrying about the fact that your operations manager isn't working very well. And when I first saw the tools, I thought, aha, something really quite interesting has happened.
So do you think that these psychometrics still have a very valid place in organisations?
I do, and I've used them for 30 years myself in my work, and I still do use them. And I'm not going to stop using them just because I found the human insight tools. But the human insight tools tell me information about other aspects of my work which psychometrics just don't touch. There is another point which I might as well admit. Insiders in the psychometric industry for a long time have been worried that psychometric companies actually don't walk the talk, they don't practice what they preach. Psychometrics is a science. It lays down very, very heavy rules about how you use tests, how you develop them, how you scientifically norm them. And if you look at the manuals of most of the tests around at the moment, including some very well-known and widely used ones, they don't practice what they preach. Some of them, I suppose because of time constraints and financial constraints, are rather shoddily put together. There's a movement at the moment called slow food, And I like to think of Peter's tests as slow instruments, slow measurement. He's developed them over many years. He's tried them out on many, many different people, and they're very robustly developed. So in fact, his tools make a number of the other tools on the market look rather shoddy scientifically. So yes, I'll continue to use psychometrics, but certainly the human insight tools, as far as I can see, are the next generation of measurement tools that can be used within organisations, and I think it's a big aha moment for the industry.